This is a very quick video to give some instructions on setting up the Sony a7RII in the Nauticam Housing for the person that is purchasing this for me now that I'm hanging up my regulator, whom I will refer to as Roger. This is the housing, and it does come with directions that are a little bit lacking in detail. So I hope to share with you things that I wished I had known before my first trip. Before I take the housing apart to set everything up, I will show you quickly how to attach the tripod, which is a really nice tripod because you can maneuver the legs with one hand. You can see the little area on the base of the housing. The tripod actually goes onto the base. A little lubricant goes on the set screw. It mounts, and then each leg goes onto each ball mount, secures, and then the length of the tripod feet can be adjusted, and then at any point in time, this can be loosened and tightened with one hand. So I would like to mention, before I get the camera ready for the housing, that we've added a little ring that I will leave on the camera strap because this makes it much easier to take the strap off and on without putting the camera in and out of the housing. So Roger, I would also like to note that the housing comes with a strap, to which you might add, what on earth would you need a strap for? I actually put all the equipment that you see here in one international sized roll-on with very firm sides that I bought from the Travelsmith catalog. And it weighs a ton. I pretend like it's not heavy, and I've never, I get away with taking it on an airplane. But I have friends that have been busted for weight, and they will actually put the camera in the housing, put the strap on the housing, and they will wear the camera and the housing on the plane. Okay, the first thing I like to do is I open the back of the housing. And before I put the camera in, I will usually lubricate my O-rings at the beginning of a trip. So when you look in the housing, this will go on the flash shoe of the camera, and that triggers the external strobe. And what you will note in here is there is a battery for the moisture sensor located inside the lid of the housing, and it is a CR2450 battery. A viewfinder block, because most of us use live view underwater, and this prevents extra lighting from getting in the housing. The tray will need to come out of the housing and mounts on the camera. It's a two-step process of depressing the red tab and opening the little latch on the right. When the tray mounts on the camera, something that was a little difficult for me when I first did this because I don't remember reading it anywhere, you actually have to lift the screen, secure the tray on the bottom of the camera, and then the screen gently closes back on the camera. The flash shoe will go on the top of the camera, and then this tray will slip into the housing. When the red snaps in, you secure the tray and make sure the screen is in place. So at the beginning of every trip, I take every O-ring off. I take a lint-free towel and make sure the track is clean. And by lint-free towel, it's really like a white lint-free towel. And then I take a little bit of O-ring grease, spread it on the O-ring. And I do this for every O-ring on the housing and on all the ports. And I usually don't do this again until the end of the trip, just to make sure that when I leave, there's no residue left on the O-rings. You'll notice some divers will actually use beach towels on their camera equipment. And we may use a towel on the outside of our housing before we open it. And then we never, ever, ever use a towel on any of our O-rings on it or on any open camera parts. One other thing I should mention, always make sure when you put the camera in the housing that the camera is off and the housing is off so the switch lines up. Now I'm going to put the back on the camera now. This is the sensor for the vacuum. I'm going to leave it off now, or actually I will turn it on now because I'll go ahead and set the vacuum so you can see what it looks like. Normally, if I was going to have this set up on the boat, I would leave that off until I was sealing it for the last time before the dive. And I just make sure that there's no debris, dog hair, or towel lint anywhere on the housing. It comes on and securely closes. This knob on the side is the zoom gear on the 16 to 35 millimeter and works as the focus gear on the 90. And it can pull out and lock in the out position. So when you're ready, you have the lens in and the focus gear attached to it. You can then set it back down. There you go. And it will seat into the lens and you can make sure it's working. Alrighty, the 90 lens is such a straightforward lens because you can just put the port right on the camera. So, lens cap off. Lens on. That lens cap off. My pre-cleaned O-ring lined up circle to circle and secured. So that is ready to go. And to get that off, you'll note that my lens caps that I use underwater, I do usually keep a carabiner on. And I will mount it on the camera and then secure it. To release the lens, you push in, flip that switch, and then the port pulls straight up. Replace the lens cap. And then this switch releases the lens. Okay, for the 16 to 35, I'm going to secure my gear in the up position, uncap the camera, hopefully more gracefully than I did last time, line up my white circles, secure the lens, and then I'm going to reseat the gear. I will uncap the camera and set up the port. You will see that the port also has an O-ring, and before and after each trip I'll do the same just like I did for the one on the housing. So this setup is a little bit trickier than the 90. Alrighty, so this extension ring 50 is a little bit tricky. You're going to line it up with the hole, and then you secure it into place. Usually the circle to circle means it's secure, and you'll turn it into that when you're on the front of the housing, because nothing turns. This is just the lock. The circle lines up to the circle. Once you get this extension ring on, this little funky, whatever the heck it's called, pushes down so it locks to the port, turns to the side, and then slips up into a little spot where it is secured. And I have the directions to that will be included. What I like to do at this point is I like to put this extension ring on the housing. So it's lined up circle to circle, secured in place. And so you know, if I had focus gear on this lens, this knob on this extension ring would control the focus gear. Now, the funky thing about the 16 to 35 millimeter lens and the way the focus gear fits, you cannot pop the camera out the back of the camera to change a battery. So when I use the 16 to 35 millimeter lens, I autofocus. If I want to manually focus, I autofocus on the subject. I flip my camera into manual focus and I maintain that distance, and then do that again if I need to change my distance from the subject. You can see that the actual zoom gear, works beautifully. So now I mount the actual port. And I'm going circle to line, and then rotating so that I am circle to circle. And then I lock the port in place. And this is ready to shoot from this stage. Roger, if you were going to be shooting without strobes, if you were doing like a snorkel trip with humpback whales, you could use the camera just like it is. And to install the vacuum system, which I thought a vacuum system was kind of silly, but I have to say, and by the way, this also has an O-ring. I have to say it is very nice knowing that the housing is airtight. So the way this works, the gauge hooks on, the vacuum comes in. Because the switch was on, you can see that there is a blue light intermittently flashing. And there is our solid green light. And then you close that up. And the last trip we went on was a 7-night trip. I actually did this at night when I was getting my camera ready and left it sealed with the vacuum on all night, and I never had to change my battery. Okay, for hooking up your strobes, this is the Nikonos bulkhead. Oh great, I have a little extra light. And note, I have put the port cover on the port, which I always keep the port cover on until the very last minute of shooting, just to protect the port from getting scratched. So for hooking up the strobes, the sync cord goes in the Nikonos bulkhead. And this is actually something that is a little tricky, and more O-rings. On these O-rings, you're going to want to use your Ikelite O-ring grease. And you'll just line up. There's a little notch that you line up with a notch inside the camera. and it will seat. And then these will go into the strobes. The strobes also have an O-ring, and I believe the instructions on these are that this particular O-ring does not need to be lubed, but you do want to make sure that the track is clean. And then this will, and you want to make sure everything is hand securely tightened. And then we'll hook the other strobe up the same way. Okay, Roger, people have different preferences. I like having one long strobe arm and one short, just as far as how I usually, if I'm shooting wide angle, I'm out here. But if I'm close focus wide angle, I come in. When I'm shooting macro, I'm usually one up and one on the side. And for doing that, I like a long and a short arm, with the long arm closest to the housing. Some people prefer long, depending on what you do. Most of these get hooked up with a double clamp. I'm going to show you how I do it with a triple clamp for mounting the solo light. It is nice when one has an extra set of hands. Brad, can you tighten that? Okay. Hit stop. And I'll take a break here. Okay, Roger, fast forward and forgive the whining dog. So this is one arm setup without the floats. Every single trip that I've gone on, times 4 that I've used this housing, I always forget to put the floats on and have to take the arm pieces apart. So this side does not have the floats, but I do have a triple clamp here that allows me to mount the solo light, which is great for modeling and can be used if you're doing macro video. These strobes also have a video light mode, so you can have extra. If you were seriously into video, you would want to get a super duper video light. When I'm doing wide angle video, I do have a magic filter for the 16 to 35 that works quite well, and you can check out Backscatter to see what they say about the magic filter. This side of the camera does have the strobe arms with floats. And you know, I am 60 years old. This massive thing I use underwater with these little 4 floats, and it is perfect for me. I don't need any extra flotation. This is what it looks like from the front. And I do have this handle that was highly recommended by Backscatter. People that are working on dive boats love it because it allows them to grab your camera without hurting anything. And there you have it.